To start this lesson, let's have a quick recap quiz of what you can remember what we've done so far. Press pause, have a go if you can answer the questions. So what we're going to look at today then is alternatives to UK legislation. So we're going to look at the positive and negatives of the way our legislative system is and then critically compare it with other processes. So the key terms we have to know is delegated legislation or secondary legislation, and this means when Parliament gives some of its lawmaking powers to another organisation, so they don't come just from Parliament. Remember, we have got sovereignty of Parliament in this country. That basically means that laws should be made and changed in Parliament only. However, there are times when they're not. The other thing we need to know is the separation of powers, so the belief that the three strands of government, the judicial, the legislative, the power to make laws, and the executive, the powers to run the country, should not be done by the same person or body. In the UK, the executive and legislative powers overlap as the Prime Minister and MPs make the laws and run the country. So, our key terms, make sure you know what they mean. Right, you have got a handout in your booklets that says how a law's made in the UK, and it asks you for a brief summary. Now, the brief summary would be that laws are proposed to Parliament as an idea in a green paper. They're then discussed in Parliament and they are researched and proposed, which becomes the white paper. They're debated backwards and forwards between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. When they agree, it is then sent to the Queen for royal assent and it becomes an Act of Parliament or a law. When we look at democracy, is it a democratic process? Well, yeah, it is, because the House of Commons do it, but the House of Lords and the monarch are not elected, so that bit is non-democratic. However, remember that the House of Commons can push through a law even if the House of Lords disagree, because of the fact that they are elected and we live in a democracy. The bodies that are involved are the House of Commons, the House of Lords and the monarch. So what I want you to do now is think about positive things about the way laws are made in the UK, and then also think about some negatives. We've already discussed some of these. Try and write down a couple of points on each side. So what we're going to do now is we are going to have a look at the UK legislative process and rank these statements into how far they agree that the UK legislative process does not need changing. So these are our points. The UK legislation process is thorough. It goes through 5 stages twice. That's brilliant because it means there's little scope for error because of how thorough it is and how many people check it. The legislative process has existed for many centuries, is part of our tradition, is part of the way our country is. The members of the House of Lords are not elected by the public. This, of course, would make it non-democratic and really challenges our ideas of a democracy. Having 2 chambers or houses means that there are checks and balances during the legislation process, which is, again, a really good thing. They can veto the other one and so on and so forth. The House of Lords has a lot of expertise in legal matters, so they've got that understanding of the legal process. And the House of Commons can push legislation through without the consent of the House of Lords, which is brilliant because they're the elected ones and are therefore more powerful. The members of the House of Commons are not necessarily legal experts. They're MPs, they've been elected in, they are politicians. Very, very few of them will have law degrees. Very, very few of them will have experience as working in the legal system. The members of the House of Lords are not MPs, so they've not been voted in, which again challenges democracy. The Queen just signs the bill to make it an act. She's not really very much part of it, which you could argue is good because she's not been elected, so that doesn't really challenge democracy. The members of the House of Commons are elected by the public, which again improves democracy. The PM and MPs play a role in running the country and in making new laws. Again, they are elected And the process cannot cater for emergencies as it takes too long, which is when we have to have emergency powers put in, which then can create tensions and cause arguments, such as the new police bill that's currently being debated in Parliament. So, with those points, then you could answer this 8-mark question. The UK legislative process does not need changing. How far do you agree with this statement? And again, as always with your 8-mark question, you put your first sentence of actually answering the question, how far do you agree or disagree? And then you do your for side, your against side, and your conclusion that is justified. The answers that you put in there, the points you put in there, are from the previous slide, and you need actual facts and evidence and keywords to back it up. Okay, so we know how laws are made in the UK. There are then different ones to look at with secondary or delegated legislation. So delegated legislation is when Parliament gives lawmaking powers to lower organisations. Is it democratic? Well, yeah, a lot are. If we have a look at local councils, they can make something called bylaws, which are made from the councils. Local councillors are voted in, so it is democratic. There's no such thing as a House of Lords within councils, so they only have the elected representatives, and therefore that makes bylaws democratic. They are also suited to the local area, so they really represent those people well. Statutory instruments, this means that you can change laws without Parliament, so that is not democratic. And orders in council, these are changes made by some ministers, but not all. They don't actually pass through Parliament. Although ministers are elected, because it doesn't go the official way through Parliament, that's only partly democratic. So a quick exam question for you. What is secondary or delegated legislation? It will need an explanation for 2 marks.